When the call comes in, leadership is everything.
We analyze the data in real time,
making the tough decisions under pressure. Welcome to Stat Leadership.
All right. Hello. Pardon me. Hello.
Restart.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode for The Importance of Followers. I'm Phil Moy from St. Louis, Missouri.
I'm JR Pickett from Salt Lake City, Utah.
And Chetan Kharod from New Braunfels, Texas.
All right. And we got an interesting topic today. Not really sure. It's caught me off guard, but the importance of followers, right? You think about leadership. Yeah, followers are part of the equation to keep it balanced. But do you care to elaborate on why this deserves its own episode or its own kind of chapter, if you will, in our discussion on leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's an often undervalued or overlooked role, the vital role of followers in a successful leadership movement, right? As we were discussing earlier, sometimes the leader is out there in the front, they have a crazy idea or something, but without somebody who's alert, engaged, and joining in and really advertising, that leader is not going to get very far, largely because they won't have anyone to lead. So these followers, we're going to talk hopefully about what kind of follower to be, and then also how to foster our followers so that the idea can get beyond us and get into organizational success and development of our followers into future leaders as well.
It sounds very Zen Kung Fu mastery. In order to lead, you must learn to follow kind of thing. In order to learn Kung Fu, you must learn to not learn Kung Fu or something.
So it is a little bit like that, right? People often do mistakenly think that it's the position or the title or the whatever's embroidered on your shirt that's going to get you that thing. But actually, in leading, we want to be the kind of leader that people would want to follow. And sometimes, let's be honest, the leaders that we are working with may not be up to snuff. And then we have to be the kind of follower that can get them there. When I'm not in charge, I often ask myself, what kind of follower would I want right now? And I'll just do that.
Yeah, I go to a great movie that has several examples of different types of leadership called Any Given Sunday with Jamie Foxx and Al Pacino, Cameron Diaz. And there's Jamie Foxx is this young rookie quarterback who's suddenly thrust into that leadership position, and he's struggling with it. And Lawrence Taylor is talking to him in the locker room, and he says, "You're leading. Is anybody following you?" And just giving some insight, some mentorship to him at that time. That's true. Without followers, without somebody who believes in what you're saying, then you're just a shirtless nut dancing in a field.
Exactly.
Yeah, that reminds me of this metaphor. I'm reading a book right now called Leadership by John Maxwell. It was recommended to me by the Dr. Jose Cabañas, former immediate past president of NAMSP, because I may be thrust into leadership in the coming years. But essentially, I asked for some books to read, and he recommended this book. And one of the metaphors that kind of stuck as I'm reading this book is he's, as a leader, it's like leading a team to the top of a mountain. Sometimes you'll be ahead of your team. Sometimes you'll be walking beside them, and sometimes you'll be behind them. And I totally get that when I'm hiking. I remember when I was post-college, pre-med school, had to lead my friends through hiking through the Appalachian Trail in the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee, and give or take, we have never ever backpacked at all. And I just immediately assumed kind of leadership role, and I ended up having to be in the back and just helping out my friend who was straggling behind because we didn't want to leave him behind. And that kind of emphasizes the need for, as a leader, you're part of a whole group, and your job is to help your group move forward. And you're going to move a little slower, but you're going to be behind everybody, or as well as beside them, to help move them forward. So that just reminds me of that little anecdote.
So true. The leader has to be flexible and be wherever they need to be and be whatever it is the organization needs them to be in that moment. Sometimes and we used to call that, in early officer training, they called it situational leadership. You didn't only want to have one style. You wanted to have a style that suited the situation, your people, and the exact circumstances you were in. So I think for novices, that's hard to do. I think the more experienced we get, we either logically think it through, or I think the more and more experience we have, we read the room, feel the vibe, and we adjust without necessarily thinking about it. But it's like in Maverick, Top Gun, there's 20 times the movie where they say, don't think, just do. And what they don't say is, once you've achieved mastery in something, then don't think, just do. Because all of those people are highly experienced combat pilots and Top Gun graduates. It's okay for them not to think, and just do. But a novice better not be doing that, because then you're probably going to muck something up. You might not know enough to not think, just do.
Yeah, I think that is, as you learn, as you gain experience, it's a matter of streamlining thought processes, creating muscle memory, but in this case, this mental memory of certain actions that are taken. And I talk about this with the residents sometimes when we're talking about patients in the emergency department, that to avoid some of that clutter, having a kind of a protocol like if this, then that, having order sets in their mind of, if I see this, I'm going to do that. And then that's an automatic action. So it requires a bit less conscious thought. For the novice, that's not possible, that you have to have conscious thought and therefore be regimented about it. But when you get to that level of experience, like you're talking about, then a lot of those kind of pre-made, practiced mental actions then make you faster in a lot of other ways as well, and enable you to see further beyond the couple feet in front of your face.
Yeah, for sure.
I had a leadership experience, and I'm ashamed to say a bad one, that when I was in a leadership position, that this was way back when I was in summer stock theater, and I had worked at this summer stock theater a few years. And summer stock, if you don't know it, it is just a neck breaker. You are like, show opens Wednesday, you've got shows Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, strike the set Sunday, put it up, do your technical rehearsals Monday morning, and then doing more rehearsals. And then like you're through the days that the show's running at night, you're building the sets for the next show during the day, or rehearsing for the next show during the day. And it's as we call it, the Brigadoon of summer theater boot camps. And so I had worked there as doing technical work, the sets and lighting, for a few years. And then I got hired on as the technical director for a few of the shows. And I was relatively young. I was in college at the time. And I came in and I had a very unsuccessful experience as the leader during that summer. It eventually got better, but what happened was I came in and I lacked credibility with the group. I had worked there. I knew what I was doing, but even because of the program that I was in, because of the college program that I was in, which has some renown, like they discounted that. That was like, oh, here you're coming in with an attitude and think you're better than us and so forth. And I did not do a good job of conveying otherwise early in that summer. And it was a brutal experience for me. I learned a great deal on street cred, and I did get a comment from one of the guys who said, I hated you for this and this, but there was one thing, like there was no point at which, like, if something needed to be done, that you weren't there earlier, or that you weren't there later. Like, you were always there doing that. You had no problem like doing any part of the job, lifting stuff, doing that. And I respected that. The backbreaking work that comes from this is from being a leader. Yeah, sometimes you got to get your hands dirty, and there was a lot in general where I was seeing it as this hierarchical kind of thing, and I was wrong, particularly in that environment where you're not here because you're smart. You're here because you're dedicated, you know what you're doing, and you're hardworking. So that was an important lesson that I've carried through with my various other leadership positions, and that's informed a lot of my leadership style, is really getting my hands dirty and getting down in it and flattening the organization some.
Yeah, and what you're describing, JR, is probably an experience all of us have had at some point, especially when we are novice leaders. So we're in the position, we have not necessarily had a lot of experience, nor have we really had somebody point out that, hey, when you're starting out, you need to do this and this, and later on you can do that. And then it leads to one of the leadership and followership challenges, right? The whole idea of leading by example. Where does leading by example stop? Meaning getting our hands dirty. When does that become micromanaging or not empowering or not trusting our followers? It's somewhere in there. There's this gray area. And honestly, there's no way to tell somebody, hey, after 2.5 weeks, you're micromanaging. Up until then, you were leading by example. It's not like that. So it's part of it, like you were talking about before. It's all about that gained experience and figuring out how far is it leading by example. And then beyond that, am I around too much? Because I always call it leadership by walking around. We want the leader to be seen and around. And then yet, if they never leave, you're like, dang, I can't really work because you're here.
Oh, the boss is here. Look busy.
Trying to balance that balance beam there. That kind of, yeah, exactly. Leading by example and and also being the follower that you would like to be. I think that those are two important components that you struck there. I'm reminded of, I had a medical director in a former emergency department group that I worked with who was just one of these guys who he was quiet, but you knew what he expected of you, but his actions spoke louder than what his words, because he didn't need to speak loudly. For example, he wasn't a guy who liked the limelight or wanted to go to all these conferences and give all these keynote speakers or anything like that. In fact, he shied away from that. And he said, this is me. I don't need that. But I know you guys are all part of this, and I know this is important for your career. So what I will do is everybody gets an educational stipend. I will donate my educational stipend to a young faculty member who wants to do some career development conference or anything like that. And I'm more than happy to work the shifts while you're gone. I was like, dang, we talk about leading by example and leading by action and everything. And
That's kind putting your money where your mouth is. Like,
that is literally. And he led by example, but as a follower, as one of his team, I was like, this is the kind of person that he is, and this is the kind of person that I should be for him. So it came to the point where, sure, he didn't make all the best decisions, and he wasn't like the perfect leader, but like he was my medical director during the COVID pandemic. It was hard for everybody, especially the emergency department. But I knew that if he had called me at 2:30 in the morning and said, Phil, I can't tell you why, I can't tell you any specific reasons, but I need you here now, I'd have been like, okay. I wouldn't ask any questions. I just respect it. Like, I'll be there. Because I knew that he had my back, and he put his mouth where his money was. It was just amazing. Yeah. And so it just reminds me of a follower, but being a good leader. And in order to be a good leader, you have to be a good follower and set that expectation. It's just a really poignant experience in my life.
I think this goes to what you were saying earlier about situational leadership too, knowing when to step back, knowing when to back off of the people that you're leading to let them do what they need to do and support them in that. It shows a lot of faith in what they do and their knowledge and ability, and being present, trooping the line. Okay, just pick up a shovel and start digging, I'm going to help move these ammo crates or whatever it is that needs to happen. But trying not to lead from that position when you are joining the rest of the crew in lifting stuff, knowing when to back off of being a leader and be the follower of the person that's following you. And that, I think that everybody wants to know that you are willing to do anything that you ask somebody else to do. I'm going to give you this shit job to do. I'm sorry, it sucks. I know it. And they have to believe that you would do it for them if you could. And the fact that we can't do every job in the organization, there's no point in that. And so they get that sometimes there's stuff that needs to be done, and it is what it is. So you convey that. I would do this for you if I could. At the same time, people want to know that you know something about their job. What they don't want to be constantly reminded of is that you think that you could do their job as well as they can. that will undermine you as a leader. That will undermine the support that they have. Oh, you just think we're better than all of us here, and it is a matter of leading the organization and those individuals, those subordinate leaders, if you will, but also respecting that knowledge, that expertise, and because if you don't, if it's just if you're just coming off like that, everything about their job, then it's not going to work. We see that in hospital leadership quite a bit too. You have a lot of like nurses that rise through the organization and then they get to executive levels and they convey this, I know this job because I did this job. It's like, yeah, but it was different when you did it 20 years ago. You're not really listening to us and what this job is now. And so it can undermine that trust from their own nursing staff, even though they feel like, hey, I came from the trenches. Yeah, you did, but the trenches are a little bit different. And, you pointing out that you've done this all before, and therefore this newer person who's rising in the ranks has nothing new to offer. That's not going to get you any respect.
Yeah. And I think part of leading is it's tough to do when you first start in that organization or in that position, but with a little bit of deliberate observation, you can see which of your followers are in which what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses. And one way to accelerate that is what I used to do with my EMS fellows is that they would do a personal assessment, right? So in the military, for some reason, even the first time you meet somebody, they call it feedback. And I'm like, how can this be feedback? We haven't talked about anything yet. I used to call it initial assessment. So I'd give my fellows this assignment 2 weeks before we were going to meet. They would have to send me a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threat, a SWOT analysis of themselves. And it was funny because they initially just wanted to write about their work abilities. And I would challenge them to say, consider your whole self, right? And many of them felt, hey, that's none of your business. I show my work face here. And I was like, I don't need to know the details of your private life. What I want to know is how do you assess yourself globally as a person? This tells me how you view your work-life balance. Do you have enough time to think about the rest of your life? Am I overloading you so you only think about work? But those kinds of things. And then seeing how they assess themselves. And then what I observed, and JR, what you were talking about, I'm not going to be able to observe them at work unless I'm there. And if I'm really there too much, then I'm going to affect how they're doing it. So I don't see them in their natural habitat. They are now observed. And when any of us has observed, it changes everything, right? So there's lots of ways to come at this, but part of it is the better we know our followers, their hopes and dreams, their aspirations, their obstacles, the better we can enable them. And if you go to a military example, there's great episode of Band of Brothers, The Breaking Point. They've been sitting up in the woods of the Battle of the Bulge for over a month. They're finally getting to the point where they need to take that town. Everybody would follow Winters through the gates of hell, but he's not there anymore. He's one step back because he's been promoted, but he's not at headquarters. He's living in the woods with them. So even though he's not in the foxhole with them, they know he's in the suck with them. They know he's trying to get them all the resources. And there's examples of leaders there. Norman Dyke is portrayed in a way. And to be fair, Dyke was a valorous soldier, actually. He had multiple Bronze Stars, several decorations with valor for what he had done. But how he's portrayed in the episode is very much a kind of a shirker and somebody who's not engaged. So we've all met that kind of leader who's full of their position but never around. You can't get them to resource you right or to support you because they're just not there. And that episode shows a number of these things. And interestingly, Winters remains I don't want to say he's a natural born leader. He probably had an affinity, but I think he was deliberate. He really wanted to help out First Sergeant Lipton. He really wanted to empower his dudes. And he couldn't have done that if he wasn't there. But he also knew the weaknesses. He wasn't going to let Peacock run the company because dude wasn't up to the challenge. So knowing people, it takes a lot of work. And the leader has two objectives. I need to know my people and I need to execute the mission at the same time.
Yeah, that episode's such a good episode. But our previous thing you said, you think the Hawthorne effect is real? Yeah. Observation changes what happens. So yeah, that episode, I love that episode it's such a poignant episode for leadership. You have Spears, you had Lipton as well. But you're right. Colonel Dick Winters was in the back. He was still suffering with him out in the Battle of the Bulge. But man, that episode just concentrates on the men of Easy Company. And as you said, the followers, one of them was, I believe, Lipton, who as a leader, you'd see who is a sub-leader or who is also leading the men. And then part of your job as leadership is to let your followers or let those who serve underneath you succeed. And that should be your goal as a leader. And Colonel Dick Winters, obviously, it wasn't purely intentional because he had to manage an entire company, but he was not in that episode very much at all. It was Lipton and Spears. And in that episode, Lipton, particularly, I really remember this poignantly, going around to each foxhole, checking on the men, saying, hey, how you doing? And then going into one of the other guys and saying, giving a great example of feedback and expectations for one of the guys who was making fun of their new CO, I believe. And he says, that's a great impersonation. It cracks me up, but don't do that in front of the men. It's bad for the team. So you got to stop doing that. But he would be the guy who would go around every foxhole, checking everybody's doing. He couldn't solve the problems, but say, hey, how you doing? And at the end of the episode, it really comes to point when Spears, who's a higher rank than he is, says, even though Colonel Winters wasn't there, the men said there was always someone they can lean on and appreciate, and that person is going to be promoted. And Lipton's like, just looking at him at a blank stare. He's like, you have no idea who I'm talking about, dude. He's like, it's you, man. You were the one, right? And that if I had someone under my leadership who did that, I'm like, that's who I would want to succeed and do well. And that's what a leader should strive to do, is have your followers succeed. And that's where you should really learn to take that step back.
To a point that we brought up in this episode, that episode there is a good illustration of it, because this assault on this building is failing on this German position. Dyke is given an overly complex battle plan and really the hesitation has put them in a very bad position. And Winters is headed to go take over. And Colonel Sink very rightly says, you are the battalion commander. Get back here.
I remember that.
You need to be here. So in that conversation we're having about knowing when to step back as a leader, and that's when he puts Spears in. Also, Spears demonstrating what it is to clearly communicate a very simple objective and the effect that had on organizing the men and being a successful assault. So that, I think that's a really good picture of, and it came from Sink when, Winters is very capable of doing this, but you've got to step back for a minute and kind of keep that big picture and let your people do their thing, which he did.
And there's so much more in that. Now, obviously, we're all fans of it, but like Spears runs in, he asks his first sergeant, right? So he goes to a subordinate, a follower, and his first question is, what's going on here? So he immediately gets a sit rep from somebody who's been in the dirt there. He doesn't come in and say, here's what we're going to do, right? He also looks at the other leader, takes one look at his face, and he goes, I'm taking over. So he also makes it very clear, this is what's happening now. And then when Lipton told him the problem, we're pinned down by that sniper over there, it's really shocking. All those men of Easy Company were incredible soldiers. Why it didn't occur to them to focus all their firepower on that one sniper until he went away. That's what happens with followers, right? No matter how great they are, sometimes the situation just overwhelms them, and the leader has to keep their head just above that mess. And his first instructions were like, JR, like you said, he said, I want mortars and grenades on that building till it's gone. And when it's gone, follow me. That made it really crystal clear to everybody what was expected. It was within their power to do. He didn't tell them to take the whole town or anything silly like that. Reachable goals, knew the people, led to their level. He also didn't say, aim your mortar this way and position it that way, which would have been ridiculous. Those mortarmen were more than good enough to do what they were doing. So he did. He respected their capabilities, empowered them to take the action. One other thing, though, to do that, you have to have a sense of your followers. What's their critical thinking ability? What's their level of engagement? And if you can think this way, then you can see where you're, and it's dynamic. On a bad day, an otherwise solid person might just be emotionally overwhelmed, didn't get enough sleep, argument with the spouse, kid is sick, whatever. They're not going to be able to bring their A game, and we have to know that so we can support them to be their best in that moment.
You mean setting expectations and checking on progress is a good thing for your followers?
I read that in a book somewhere, I swear.
What do you want from me? Just tell me what you want.
And that art of setting expectations is actually it's quite challenging. Just to circle back, because you think you've set the expectation, but I feel for me when I have to do this with my team, I have to be very deliberate and very explicit and always sum it up. All right, action plans for this meeting. Here's what we need to do, and here's the expectations of how it should look. I always tell people there are 1,000 ways to skin a cat. I'm not going to tell you which way. We just need to get there. I don't care how we get there. With integrity, we get there, but we need to get there with integrity. Figure out a way to do that kind of thing, right? But that expectation, I really have to be very intentional and cognizant of that when I do that. It is something that I find that a lot of leaders don't do. Don't be very explicit about those expectations and checking on the progress.
This is a difficult balance because in any objective, it's a pyramid. Okay. So at the top of that pyramid is your overall organizational strategic objective. So like in that case, taking Band of Brothers, for example, win the war. Okay. And then there's pieces of that. We can break down into pieces of that. And that's the whole reason we have this sort of hierarchical organization. Like you've got 5 to 7 people under each person, and that builds that pyramid. And so a leader has to know how far down that pyramid because not only is that personnel, but that's tasks. And those tasks from win the war go all the way down to dig a foxhole this way. And if the leader is down there, if that sort of mid-level leader, the platoon leader is down there saying, you need to dig your foxhole this way, then that's micromanaging. That's wrong. And Chad, as you're saying, knowing the capabilities of the folks, like when Spears says mortars or grenades on that building until it's gone, he's not detailing this is how you do that kind of thing. He's got the trust in that. So he comes just far enough down in that pyramid of implied tasks to give them the direction that they need, and they can run with it. Again, as a leader, to avoid micromanagement, don't go so far down in that pyramid of implied tasks. If things are not being executed down at that granular level, then you've got to find out, okay, how come y'all know how to dig a foxhole? Like, why is this not happening? Or, hey, why are none of those mortars landing on target? Oh, okay, we haven't trained with this particular system. It just got handed to us. And okay, I can fix that. That's something that I, as a leader, can provide space and time and so forth for you to fix. At the same time, if you're too far up in that chain and you don't have executable vision for those folks at those granular levels, then they're also not going to be able to execute quite the way that you want. And providing the guide rails, like how far down do I have to go? If you tell Private Snuffy, okay, go win the war, then that's not enough direction to be actionable for Private Snuffy. And you may be surprised, possibly horrified by how they decide to try to solve that problem. And how far down you go. And that is a constant dance. And as you're saying, when do you step back? When do you lean in? How do you, as a leader, you're moving up and down that pyramid a lot.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's such a good point. And sometimes the best technically proficient followers or leaders are not necessarily the best for that moment, right? I often have caught myself misunderstanding my followers' technical ability for their grasp of the whole situation. And I found that that's been done to me too. When I was the follower, somebody assumed that because I was good at emergency medicine, I would also be good at basically everything else they were thinking I ought to be able to do. But that doesn't mean I was necessarily a good group surgeon or a good squadron commander. That halo effect is very tricky. So my best fellows in terms of emergency medicine were not necessarily my best fellows in terms of relating to the firefighters or relating to the teams we were supporting, or the best one to put in the stack when we had a high-risk warrant that was getting served. The best doctor didn't necessarily need to be in that stack. Sometimes they were awful in the field and they needed to be taught that still.
I've thought about some leadership examples there. One that came to mind once was we needed a Churchill and you were a Chamberlain. And Churchill, who had some middling success and then really successful leader in a certain context, and then afterwards wasn't quite as successful. I think that you have to cultivate these various styles for that moment.
Yeah, you have to be schizophrenic, knowing when to be a little bombastic and stubborn as a Churchill, or to be a little introverted, diplomatic as a Chamberlain. You have to be schizophrenic in your leadership, and that comes from kind of experience, but also, as Chet said, reading the room. As emergency physicians, sometimes we do that well, and sometimes we're just in our own heads because poop is hitting the fan, and we're not paying attention. So that is part of the challenge, and part of the challenge of leadership, leading by example, if you will.
Yeah, and especially with followers. It's funny, like there's some kind of followers that we really struggle with, like the ones who don't know and think they know are hard to work with.
Yep.
The ones who don't know and don't want to know are even harder. You're like, dang, how are we going to work this? And then the other ones are the ones who know some stuff but think they know everything. That's really a challenge too. And I've had people who were so fixed on being, hey, I was right. I'm like, I know you were right, but you basically insulted everybody in the room being right. You could have been equally right and not kicked everybody in the face while doing that. And and it's weird because people are like, don't tell me how to be. I'm like, I'm not really telling you how to be forever, but assuming you want to succeed in this particular thing that I'm teaching you, I'm simply saying that this might be another approach to consider and try it out. If it doesn't work, give me the feedback. Maybe it doesn't work. Maybe that was just me. But it is dynamic. It requires the interaction we've been talking about. People have to trust you. Like you're not going to give them a bad grade. You're not going to give them a bad evaluation. The balance between setting boundaries and setting expectations while also giving people freedom to swing for the fences. It takes some effort on the leader's part.
I got some feedback once. I was leading a small team, and we have our external parent organization that had a liaison that was challenging to work with. And they felt they knew a lot more than they did about what it was that we were responsible for and what we were doing. And we were in a meeting, we're talking about this stuff, and I stepped on them pretty hard at one point. I was just like, yeah, you really don't have any experience in this. We do, so you're gonna have to let us do what we do. And afterwards, one of my colleagues is a medic. So yeah, that didn't go well. And I'm like, I regretted it as soon as I said it. Yeah, I read the look on their face. I was like, oh shit, I should have approached that differently. And fortunately, that was not a catastrophic loss of rapport at that time, as we had been working together. But I found ways to work better together, finding that this person was different in this group dynamic, group meetings and so forth, feeling they needed to put up the walls and stake out the territory and so forth. And so by eliminating those group meetings and just working with them one-on-one, they were much more reasonable and much easier to talk to and make that a human relationship.
I'll tell you, hidden in there is a great little pearl also, JR, that your medic felt comfortable telling you, hey, that didn't go right. If you were heavy-handed or unapproachable in every other way, they wouldn't have dared to say anything to you about that, right? That ability or willingness or that environment that you fostered. And sometimes fostering it one-on-one is the place to start. I remember my first few staff meetings when I was a squadron commander, they sucked so bad. Like I really was embarrassed to be there, and they were my squadron's staff meetings. And I walked out of like the third one or fourth one, and I was like, I have no idea why these suck so bad. And most of us have an aversion to administration anyway, because we're like doers, until we realize that just like the procedures we love to do, you can treat administration like a new set of procedures that you're going to learn. And once you understand the indications of the procedure, complications, things that can go wrong, how to correct for those, then all of a sudden the administration part of the job is not that hard. It's just nobody told us that administration is also a learned skill. It's not just certain people. We can all learn it. We were not all born intubators or central line placers. And even if we were, we didn't all do it with ultrasound initially, but now we do. You can learn and evolve as we go. So after several sucky meetings, I looked over at my superintendent, who was just in the job, like he'd only been there for one meeting. And I'd been having sucky meetings since before him. So I kind of leaned over to him and I go, Dan, that meeting sucked. And he's, it was his first week on the job. He's like, it wasn't that bad. I go, seriously, you're a senior master sergeant and you're telling me that meeting was not that bad? And he goes, all right, it sucked. I was like, excellent. So now I know that you know what suck looks like, and I need your senior master sergeant feedback on how to make it better. And I go, listen, don't do the military movies thing, permission to speak freely. I was like, I'm inviting your feedback. And it's not just for me. It'll make me better. But for crying out loud, our whole squadron is going to improve if somebody fixes this mess. And he goes, okay, first thing we should do is you don't run the meeting. You're the commander. You receive the meeting. It's like, okay, I have no idea what you're talking about, but okay. And he goes, so let me take 2 meetings and run them. I was like, you can do it. The only thing I ask is show me what you're doing. Show me how it works and why it worked, and then we'll be good. And that man cleaned up our administration so fast, right? And they were tricks, but it was the idea of assessing him as a follower, inviting his expertise. He'd been in 22 years in the military. He'd been around, right? And then also my own, we're emergency medicine guys. If you stick it in the esophagus, you should really know that you did that. It would be incredibly foolish to think you didn't and keep bagging that thing. Yeah. Dan Wolf, a phenomenal guy. He got us on track. In a future episode, we can talk about the procedures of leadership and maybe some of the things Dan taught me in my first command.
Now I'm curious. I want to know what he meant by receiving the meeting, but I guess we'll have to wait for another episode for that one.
I think that you touched on one way that you build followers is to be open to feedback, to seek feedback, to seek their understanding, their mentorship, and that just having people feel heard is one big part of that.
Yeah. It's interesting. The emergency department I work with, we are in a transition where old staff is stepping down, new staff is coming in, and there's some friction there between them. And I set up a meeting with a bunch of the older staff and newer staff, and concerns were brought to me by nursing leadership. These weren't the people that maybe you should have the meeting with and everything. And I was like, they're exactly the people I think we should have a meeting with, because they're not afraid to give me feedback. They've been in the trenches with me. And so they know that I'm not going to bonk them in the head. I may call them poo heads, or I'm cleaning up the language because of the podcast. But you can imagine what we could, in our dark humor of emergency medicine world, where we insult each other with love. And I was just taken aback by the reticence of leadership. It was like, maybe you shouldn't have these people. Maybe it was out of respect for me as a physician, but at the same time, just no, I want to have this idea torn apart or really critiqued, because that's what will make it better. And so I'm not afraid of getting yelled at or getting scolded at or having this idea ripped apart. It's okay. My ego isn't on the same level as whatever this project we're working on. And being open to that critique and that feedback from your followers is an important part that'll build that trust and will allow you to motivate them in the future. And I think that's such a vital part. And we really have to remove that ego from any critique that we get from our followers. I ask for it all the time. Anything for me, anything I need to work on. More than 90% of the time, they say, no, I can't think of anything, but it may be just so quick to bring it up. But I think, again, that transparency to have someone come up to you and say, hey, man, that freaking sucked, man. I take it with a grain of salt, but also take it with some valuable opportunities to improve.
That touches on my second means of building your followership, is standing up for them. And you did. And that like, you provide some top cover, you stand up for the people that you're leading. If they're getting grief from somewhere and you step in and take the brunt of that, then they will kill for you. That's you demonstrating your loyalty to them. And do that any chance you get. Our job as leaders, clear roadblocks and so forth. But, when you have to go to the mattresses on behalf of the people you are leading, they absolutely see that, and that immediately builds trust.
Yeah, so true. And then giving credit where credit is due, right? So often one of the uncomfortable parts of leading is your people do a great job, but they call you up on stage to get the recognition. And that's, on the one hand, it's the reality. When Easy Company did something, Major Winners was going to get the acknowledgement. They weren't going to call all 160 guys up there and give them something, right? But at the same time, as a leader, we have the opportunity to spotlight the people who did the work, give the credit where credit is due. And those are also ways in which our followers can feel seen. They understand that we're not taking from them. Objective is never to shine the spotlight on ourselves. We want to do as much as we can to shine that positive spotlight where it deserves to be, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I always crack up, Chet. Half your stories are of you recognizing those who follow you, but it always ends up with you getting yelled at by your senior officer. I always find that hilarious.
Yeah, I've wondered about that. Actually, my kids ask me about that. They're like, why, when you do the right thing and stand up for your followers, do you get your butt chewed? I was like, I think people don't expect it. What they're expecting is for me to do the other thing. And sometimes the other thing is the right thing to do. But sometimes, like JR was saying, if you spotlight great effort made by somebody, they literally will do anything you ask them to. And then that's the sacred trust, right? You really have to make sure that now that you are all seeing eye to eye and you've earned that trust, then you have to really treat that as something you're guarding. We had so many little issues that used to happen in the military where some other officer would come and yell at my airmen about something. And they just wouldn't tell me because the previous culture in our squadron was the person I replaced very much believed in their circle, and officers are right. The higher ranking you are, the more right you are. And I couldn't stand that approach because I often felt that maybe I just didn't know enough to be right about something or not. And then also my very first day on the job, I was immediately misunderstood and written up. And you guys know the story. I was checking out the dorms in civilian clothes my first night as a squadron commander because I was just concerned. Are my airmen living in a safe place? Is it nice? Now, I couldn't check their rooms because that would be considered a room inspection. And you're not allowed to do that without certain other steps being taken. But I literally just wanted to see does the building look decrepit? Are the fire extinguishers charged in the stairwell? Are there lights on in the stairwell so my people aren't falling down the stairs in an emergency? What I didn't know is if you're wandering around the dorms at night, there's usually a security patrol going through. So I saw this bright light, had a voice say, "Stop where you are, sir. Come out in the light here. Keep your hands where I can see them." And I was like, oh no. My first night as a commander. And then he looks at me and he goes, "Can I help you, sir?" I go, "Yeah, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Kharod. I command most of the people that live in these dorms." And they're like, "These are enlisted dorms. And you're a lieutenant colonel. So what the heck?" I was like, "Yeah, like I said, I just want to see how they live." And he's like, "Officers, this is not officer country. This is where the enlisted are. And by the way, since I saw you here, before I approached you, I had to call it in case you were a bad guy. So now command post knows that I've stopped somebody and I'm going to have to report that it was you. So now your name's going to go on the police blotter for your first night on command." I was like, okay, it could have been for worse things. This is okay. Yeah. So, of course, the next day, my first sergeant comes walk. I walk in and he's standing there with his cup of coffee and he's like, "Met the cops last night. Way to go, sir." I was like, "Yeah, I did, but it was for a good thing." And he was like, "It was a very good thing." Because the thing is, if you're going to do those interactions, you could let your first sergeant know and I can smooth some stuff out for you. It's like, okay, lesson learned. But he was a phenomenal follower. Obviously, he already was, but I didn't know that. It was my first day. But anyway, sometimes we end up doing the wrong thing, getting on the blotter for all the right reasons, too.
Got it.
But enlisted, when they heard about it, the airmen were all like, wow, what'd you come around there for? I'm like, "I just wanted to see how you're living. You're America's sons and daughters." And that was on my mind. And they were all like, "Dang. We didn't know the colonels cared what we do." I'm like, "Oh, yeah. I've eaten in your chow hall, but not in uniform. So I know what kind of food you're getting. I already know this."
So before we get to our next segment, could you just briefly sum up what this episode, the key points of this episode, so if our listeners can just recap that?
Yeah, so it's been a great conversation. We talked about the importance of followers, the people themselves, and then we also talked about the vital role of followership in order for anything to succeed. Especially, our entire purpose in this podcast is to talk about the ideals and actions of a leader. Cultivating, taking care of, identifying, and empowering our followers is a huge part of leadership. So we talked about leading by example. We talked about being the kind of follower you want to follow you. We talked about the importance of setting expectations, checking in on the progress, giving feedback when it's good and feedback when it needs to be better. By doing all these things and walking around, JR highlighted the importance of building trust and loyalty. We talked about how when our behavior matches what we say we're going to do, it helps build that with some unity in our thought, word, and deed. And all of this is used to ultimately to motivate and empower our team so they can do the hard work that we know they can do.
All right. Last segment. Are we going to do a leader example, leaders read, everyday leadership, or what are you thinking?
I really was thinking through my leadership examples. So.
All right, we can do that one.
If you say leaders read, I'm going to have to come up with something on the fly.
Okay. All right. Our last segment, let's talk about leadership examples. Go ahead, guys. Let our audience know what is catching your mind this month.
Go, JR. You're ready.
Yeah, so going fictional and non-fictional. For my non-fictional example is Deputy Agent in Charge James Dennehy from the New York FBI field office. His letter to his shop when he was rather suddenly asked to put in his retirement papers and this political shakeup that's occurring throughout the federal government. And that was an opportunity for him to make a lot of statements about different things, but he made it about the people that work for the organization, the good work that they do, the really important mission that they do, the camaraderie and the esprit de corps. And what better final words to give to the people that you've been leading. I really just greatly respected that he made it about them, about the people, and the honor it was to work with them, and just how important that work is. And I thought that letter was really well done. If you want to look it up, the Washington Post published it, and worth reading. This was an opportunity that a lot of different things could have been said, and there are some leaders that are going out with maybe less of a really global kind of leader's perspective on things. But I thought that his letter was just terrific. For fictional example, I'm thinking of Aliens, the movie Aliens. If you have not seen it, then punch yourself until you've seen it. Really, in my opinion, one of the greatest movies ever made for a lot of reasons, but two leadership examples in there. One is Lieutenant Gorman, the other is Corporal Hicks. And Lieutenant Gorman is largely unsuccessful as a leader in that movie. And a lot of it because he has that kind of hierarchical, I have to be standoffish from the people and from the rest of the platoon. And he makes no deliberate effort to try to get to know them as human beings. He lacks experience. Certainly that is part of it, but he does not try to pull any of that expertise from the team. The other example is Corporal Hicks, who has a very low rank, but he is one of those informal leaders in that squad. He is well known to them. Like the other people listen to him and he says, okay, we're doing this, and they don't question it. They do it. That's from his experience, but also having a clear vision. And these are the types of people that you as a leader have to engage with. Like, they provide so much expertise and make your life easier if they understand where you're coming from and what needs to be done.
Awesome.
Do you want to go, Chet, or me?
So I have a fictional and a non-fictional. I would say the non-fictional person that inspires me for his individual leadership, and then just by ultimately seeming larger than life while he was really just being himself, was an Army World War II medic named Desmond Doss. There's a movie in which Andrew Garfield portrays him. It's called Hacksaw Ridge. If you haven't seen that movie, it's worth watching. Desmond Doss was a conscientious objector who did not want to kill anybody, and yet wanted to enlist to serve his country, our country, in the war, World War II. So he enlisted, would not carry a rifle, constantly was bullied and hazed for being a commie or being whatever. But they kept giving him chances to quit. And I don't want to get out of the army. I just don't want to kill anybody. And they finally said, yeah, you can be a medic. And he was staunchly for the men. He was wherever he needed to be. He was a prayerful person, so he never stopped being the way he was. He prayed freely and often, and it finally got to the point where in the climactic scene, the way it's portrayed is that teams did not want to perform their assault or anything else without praying with him first, because he was well known for running right into the line of fire, treating people fearlessly, because he was convinced that as long as he was doing this, everything was going to be fine. He was saving lives and he was doing God's work, is what he thought. He was fearless about it. And even when he was ultimately injured, they were carrying him off the field there in a litter, and he saw somebody that he assessed as more injured than himself. And he got into an argument with the litter bearers and then ultimately jumped off the litter and forced them to take the other guy first. It's a singular example of what a young man with very strong core set of beliefs. And am I my brother's keeper? He certainly thought he was, and he was willing to die for it. I find that an incredibly inspiring story. And normally when I tell that story, I get emotional about it. I'm surprised that I didn't this time. But Desmond Doss is a really inspirational modern and real life figure portrayed fictionally in Hacksaw Ridge. Another character in this one I don't know as much about the real life person was Gene Kranz, the mission director at Apollo 13 in the movie portrayed by Ed Harris, the gentleman with the white vest. Great story behind the white vest. When they were given their teams, he was the junior leader out of 3. The senior person picked blue as their team color, and they were team blue. The next senior one picked red, so Krantz got handed the white team. They were the junior most and the newest, and he was looking for a way to unite his people, and so they wouldn't feel like they were the last. So he was looking for some physical thing. He was talking to his wife about it, and she made that white vest that he wore in that movie. He was also well known for wearing colorful red, white, and blue vests every time they recovered a crew successfully. So that was his symbol. What I love about him in the movie is that he understands the expertise of his people. He understands sometimes that they're down their rabbit hole. The flight surgeon is only thinking like a flight surgeon. The engineers are only thinking like this. Fuel is only thinking like that. Ops is only thinking like that. But he's able to bring them all together, declutter their mind about what can and can't be done. When they start trying to solve the problem, he ensures that they are solving the problem with the tools that Apollo 13 has. So over and over again throughout the movie, despite his own anxieties or concern about the survival, he's able to give direction, motivate, inspire his people, and hold them together to support the team that was far forward. Gene Kranz is another one of my heroes.
Yeah, that's a good one. All right, I'll go for mine. I'll try to be quick here. Say what you will about this man. He's in the political maelstrom right now, but I would say Volodymyr Zelensky is quite a leader. 3 years that's been invaded by a country much larger than his, the fearless Russian army and everything. And he has a background in comedic entertainment. But when the rubber meets the road and he and his countrymen have their backs against the wall, he definitely rose to the occasion. And there are elements of Colonel Dick Winters in what he's doing, and the fact that he's fighting there on the road with them. He is dealing with the brutal cold, the brutal outages, the deaths of his people. But at the same time, he's trying to campaign for them, trying to get assistance for his country as much as he can, from Europe to America to wherever he can get it. And he is trying to do what he can to fight for his followers, to do what he can to make sure that his country survives in a very brutal war that he's dealing with. So I think he is an example of a phenomenal leader. That's a realistic leader. A fictional leader, I would pick 2 here. And I'm talking about the most up-to-date movies here. I'm talking Kirk and Spock, Captain Kirk and Spock. It's such a great partnership as following and leading these two together. Captain Kirk, he's got the rank, and Spock is his, I would guess you would say, first officer. But they have a unique friendship in the fact that Spock is all about logic, no emotions. We must follow logic, and this is the appropriate next step. And Kirk is quite the opposite. He's all about follow your gut. This is what we do. And you see this kind of intertwining sine wave, cosine wave of both of them when they interact with problems. For example, in that very first newer movie, I forget the name of that Star Trek movie, where Kirk offers to save the main nemesis before they destroy the ship. He's like, here, come aboard. We'll help save your Romulan people. You guys are in trouble. Your ship is compromised. And the guy says, no, I'd rather die 1,000 deaths. And he's okay. But before he says, okay, Spock's, what are you doing, man? This guy almost destroyed your whole planet. He destroyed my whole planet. And he's like, Spock, I'm trying to show them kindness because that's the only way we'll find peace. I thought you'd understand that's a logical thing to do. And Spock's, no, not really. Spock's following his gut, and Kirk is following logic, but at the same time, they both listen to each other and adjust who they are and how they lead and how they deal with issues based on being a follower and a leader at the same time. So those are my two fictional ones.
Awesome.
Yep.
Guys, you picked some good ones this time.
Yeah.
Thanks.